Reverend Charles Turner was a man of charm. He had a commanding presence that demanded attention, both in the pulpit and in private. A polished suit, a warm smile, and a voice that could both soothe and inspire, he was everything that a pastor should be, or so it seemed. People flocked to his church, attracted by his words of faith and the miracles he promised. He spoke of God's love, of forgiveness, and redemption. Before we dive into this gripping story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you love stories packed with mystery and drama, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. There's so much more coming your way. However, Pastor Turner's charm had a darker purpose. Behind closed doors, he used his power to manipulate, control, and seduce. The women in his congregation were particularly vulnerable, drawn to him not just for spiritual guidance but for the promise of affection and love. Turner knew how to make them feel special, how to make them believe they were the center of his world. It was this power, this subtle manipulation, that allowed him to indulge in his desires, while maintaining his perfect public image. General Robert West was a man of integrity, a decorated officer who had served his country honorably. His marriage to Helen was built on love and mutual respect, but after 10 years of trying to have a child, their dream remained elusive. Despite multiple visits to doctors, tests, and treatments, Helen was still unable to conceive. It was a source of constant strain between them, though Robert never let it show. He loved his wife deeply and always assured her that their bond was unbreakable, with or without children. During one of his extended military assignments, Helen found herself grappling with feelings of loneliness and isolation. Her days were filled with quiet moments at home, with no children to raise, no one to fill the void that seemed to grow with each passing year. It was then that she heard about Reverend Turner's miracle ministry for women struggling with fertility. Desperate, Helen reached out to the pastor, hoping that his prayers might hold the key to fulfilling her greatest desire. Helen's first meeting with Reverend Turner was like stepping into a different world. The church's atmosphere was serene, with soft lighting and the faint scent of incense hanging in the air. Turner's office was no different, calm, with shelves of theological books and religious trinkets. He welcomed her warmly, listened intently to her story, and offered her words of hope that touched her deeply. "You've been through much, Helen," he said, his voice soothing. "But God's plans are greater than we can imagine. He will bless you with a child, just as he has blessed so many others." Helen felt an instant connection. The way he looked at her, his deep brown eyes full of empathy, made her feel seen for the first time in years. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't alone in her pain. But there was something else, something in the way Turner looked at her, a look that seemed to go beyond sympathy. At first, Helen dismissed it. She was there for help, nothing more. Over the following weeks, Reverend Turner's attention toward Helen grew increasingly personal. His prayers for her fertility became more intense, and his words of encouragement began to blur the lines between spiritual advice and personal interest. Each time she returned to the church, she found herself more and more drawn to him, not just for his faith, but for the connection they shared. During one private prayer session, Turner placed his hands on Helen's shoulders, his fingers lingering a little too long. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic as he spoke of the strength of their bond in God. "You're stronger than you think, Helen," he whispered, his breath close to her ear. "Together, we can make this happen." Helen's heart raced, her mind torn between what felt like comfort and what she knew deep down was dangerous. But she couldn't deny the pull. Turner made her feel important, wanted, feelings she hadn't had in years. She was conflicted but didn't see a way out. The pastor's charm was too powerful, his manipulation too subtle. It was late one evening when the line between spiritual guidance and something far darker was crossed. Reverend Turner invited Helen to his office for a special prayer session. He assured her that this prayer would be different, more powerful, more intimate. When Helen arrived, she was greeted with dim lights, soft music, and a sense of calm that almost felt like a dream. Without warning, Turner kissed her, softly at first, then with growing intensity. The shock hit her like a thunderclap. She recoiled, but Turner was insistent. "It's okay, Helen. You're not alone in this," he murmured, his voice laced with false tenderness. "We're both lost, and we can help each other." The kiss became an affair, something neither of them could have anticipated, but both participated in willingly, though under the guise of spiritual comfort. Helen knew it was wrong, but in her vulnerable state, she couldn't find a way out. Weeks passed, and Helen found herself pregnant. The shock of it hit her like a tidal wave, overwhelming her with a mix of emotions: guilt, fear, confusion. How could she have allowed this to happen? And worse, how would she ever face Robert? She went to Reverend Turner for guidance, and his reaction was calm, even cold. He didn't show any remorse. Instead, he spoke of practical solutions that suited only his interests. "Helen," he said, his voice smooth, "this doesn't have to ruin everything. You can end this quietly. We'll take care of it. You can have the abortion and no one will ever know." Helen recoiled at the suggestion. "No," she whispered. "I can't. This is my child. I can't destroy a life." But Turner was not the type to take no for an answer. "You're making a mistake," he said firmly. "You can't keep this child. The consequences for both of us would be disastrous." General Robert West was stationed abroad, deeply involved in military operations. For 6 months, he was away, leaving Helen to face the mounting pressures of her affair with Turner and the growing pregnancy. She felt trapped in a labyrinth of lies and deceit. She was alone, except for the constant presence of the pastor, who promised to help her navigate the treacherous path ahead. But while Robert was away, Helen's internal conflict grew. She couldn't erase the child, and yet, she couldn't tell her husband the truth. The fear of losing him, of destroying the only life they had built together, consumed her. As Helen's pregnancy progressed, Reverend Turner grew increasingly desperate. The threat of exposure loomed larger, and Turner knew he couldn't let it come to that. So, he devised a sinister plan. He would eliminate the one obstacle standing between him and his perfect, controlled life, Helen. He convinced Helen that the only way forward was for her to leave town for a while, out of sight, until the pregnancy could be dealt with. She reluctantly agreed, not knowing that Turner had already orchestrated a plan to make sure she never returned. Reverend Turner had connections, people who owed him favors. With the help of his followers, he arranged for Helen to be driven to a secluded cabin far from the city. The place seemed harmless enough, isolated, tranquil, but it was a perfect trap. Helen had no idea that the moment she left the church, she was being watched. Turner's plan was simple: make her disappear, and when the time was right, orchestrate an accident that would leave no trace of her involvement. He would be free to continue his manipulations and carry on his affairs without fear of being exposed. Helen's intuition kicked in when the car she was riding in was forced off the road. Her heart pounded in her chest as the vehicle swerved uncontrollably. The accident was no accident at all. It was Turner's final act of betrayal. The car crashed, but she survived. Barely. In the chaos of the accident, a passing driver called for help, and emergency services arrived just in time to save her life. But the pastor's cruel plot had failed. Helen was rushed to the hospital, injured but alive, and it was there that the truth started to unravel. When Robert returned from his assignment, he was confronted with the unimaginable. His wife, battered and bruised, was recovering in the hospital, and the weight of her confession hit him like a tidal wave. Every piece of the puzzle fell into place as Helen recounted the affair, the manipulation, and the near-fatal crash orchestrated by Turner. His heart was shattered. The man he had trusted, the man who had counseled his wife, was a monster. Detective Clara Martin was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for taking down powerful figures. She knew there was more to this story than just a car accident. As she began to probe deeper into the details, she uncovered a string of similar incidents, other women who had been manipulated by Turner and whose stories had been hidden for years. Each victim had a story, and each one was more shocking than the last. Turner's reign of terror was more extensive than anyone had imagined. More twisted the story became. Each thread of deception revealed yet another layer of manipulation. Women came forward, hesitant at first, but once they saw the courage of Helen, they too found the strength to share their experiences. One woman, Julia, had been a young and impressionable college student when she first met Reverend Turner. He had promised her guidance and mentorship, but over time, his mentorship turned into something darker. She had fallen pregnant, and Turner had made her abort the baby, claiming that the church's reputation couldn't be damaged. Another woman, Lisa, who had been married to a wealthy businessman, described how Turner had convinced her that an affair was a form of spiritual awakening that could save her struggling marriage. She, too, had been left to suffer the consequences of a broken life. As Detective Martin pieced everything together, she discovered a pattern of psychological manipulation and exploitation. Turner's charismatic sermons and reassuring words were designed to create a web of dependency, leading each woman to believe that he was their spiritual savior. And when they fell under his spell, he took full advantage, knowing that his position of power would shield him from suspicion. Reverend Turner, however, maintained his innocence. He was smooth and calculated, spinning lies that painted him as the victim of a smear campaign. He denied all the accusations, claiming that the women were just bitter or had misunderstood his intentions. He publicly apologized to the congregation, claiming that his actions had been misinterpreted and that he was seeking spiritual redemption. But there was one thing Turner hadn't accounted for: the strength of the general's wrath. General Robert West was not a man to sit idly by while his life, and the life of his wife, had been shattered. After hearing Helen's full confession, he knew what he had to do. He used his military connections to launch an investigation into Reverend Turner's activities. Robert wasn't just a man of power, he was also a man of action. He couldn't stand to see Turner continue to manipulate others, so he set his sights on bringing the pastor to justice. The general didn't just want Turner arrested, he wanted him publicly exposed. He wanted every single person who had been deceived by this man to know the truth. As General West's investigation progressed, Turner's life began to unravel. More and more of his victims came forward, some shaking, others angry, but all of them determined to have their voices heard. The church, which had once been a sanctuary for so many, was now a place of turmoil. The congregation was split between those who believed the pastor's innocence and those who demanded justice. Pastor Turner's world, which had once been filled with admiration and respect, was now crumbling. His sermons were filled with guilt and self-pity as he tried to maintain his image, but the truth had begun to leak out, and the media were now all over him. A flood of allegations poured in, and Detective Martin's investigation was intensifying. Facing mounting pressure, Reverend Turner realized he needed an escape plan. He knew that if he stayed, he would be arrested. He made secret preparations, planning to flee the country. With the help of a few loyal followers who still believed in him, Turner started organizing his departure. He would disappear and leave his life of lies behind, a man without a country, without a church, and without any hope of redemption. But before he could execute his plan, Detective Martin closed in on him. She had traced his movements and knew he was planning to escape. The walls were closing in, and Turner was running out of time. One cold evening, Reverend Turner was confronted by General West at the church. The pastor had been expecting it, but he couldn't quite prepare himself for the fury in the general's eyes. Robert West was a man of few words, but his presence was enough to make Turner tremble. "Do you realize what you've done?" Robert's voice was calm, but beneath it, there was an unmistakable rage. "You've destroyed my wife's faith, broken her heart, and you've done the same to so many others. Your time is up, Turner." The pastor, ever the manipulator, tried to justify his actions. "I only wanted to help them," he said. "I wanted to bring them closer to God. This is all a misunderstanding." But Robert wasn't buying it. His voice hardened. "You used God's name to prey on the weak. You manipulated, lied, and caused pain. There's no redemption for you." The final chapter of Reverend Turner's life came swiftly. The authorities had finally gathered enough evidence to arrest him for a series of crimes: fraud, manipulation, assault, and most tragically, the destruction of so many lives. Turner was arrested in front of his congregation, and the shocking images of him in handcuffs were broadcast across the nation. The church, once his sanctuary, became the scene of a public trial. The media exposed his darkest secrets, and the world watched as his carefully constructed facade came crashing down. The once charismatic preacher was now nothing more than a convicted criminal, stripped of his title and his dignity. The impact of Reverend Turner's actions rippled through the church and beyond. His victims, many of whom had never spoken out before, now had the courage to stand tall and share their stories. Some sought counseling, others found strength in speaking the truth, but all of them felt a sense of closure. Helen, who had been at the center of it all, found herself grappling with guilt, shame, and a sense of betrayal. Her relationship with Robert was forever altered, and though they tried to rebuild their marriage, it would never be the same. The trust they once had was shattered, and their healing process was slow. The community, once devoted to Reverend Turner, now found itself divided. Many struggled to reconcile the man they had once trusted with the monster he had become. Some left the church, disillusioned and heartbroken, while others tried to rebuild their faith in a system that had failed them. But for Helen and General Robert West, life began anew. Though the scars of the past remained, they found solace in the love they still had for each other. They began counseling other couples struggling with infertility, using their own story as a testament to the strength that comes from facing adversity together. Reverend Turner's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that power, when misused, can have devastating consequences. His fall from grace was swift and violent, and it left a trail of broken lives in its wake. But in the end, justice was served. The story of Reverend Turner may have ended in tragedy, but for many of his victims, there was a glimmer of redemption. As they continued to heal, they learned that true strength comes not from power, but from the courage to confront the darkness and speak the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. The story serves as a powerful reminder that even in the face of deceit, betrayal, and unimaginable pain, there is always hope for healing and redemption. Thanks for watching. If you're hooked on gripping stories like this, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales. Your support means the world to us. With love and gratitude, I invite you to join our community for more captivating content. Subscribe now for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you.